You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Now it's time for our bi-weekly Women's Hockey Spotlight. That means we bring in the great Erica L. Ayala to join us and talk a little women's hockey. And Erica, a lot of action at All Star Weekend. Let's start with that.
Yeah, for sure. It was an amazing all-star weekend. There were a lot of things that were super exciting. Of course, I was able to be there as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, specifically following the PWHL. And so we had the 3-on-3 showcase. Savannah Harmon got a hat trick, which was hilarious. There were, I believe it was Kelly Panic who coordinated the throwing of the gloves from the players as part of the hat trick ceremony and tradition. So that was obviously really exciting. It's the first time that the women's 3-on-3 showcase was under the name of an actual league and not just Team USA, Team Canada. So that was super special. But there were also a lot of other activations that I honestly think the NHL could have done a better job promoting, including they had their first ever Pride Cup. And of course, we know that the NHL no longer wearing the kind of hockey is for everyone warm-up jerseys. Teams have found other ways to promote those initiatives off of the ice. But this was huge. And I think it was especially exciting for those of us who were able to be there for, it was a deck hockey tournament, effectively an adult deck hockey tournament. And Emrance Mashmeyer, who is not only a goaltender for, PWHL Ottawa, but also Hockey Canada. She actually was playing a skater role. She was not in net and had some pretty nice moves. So I thought it was pretty good. I got to talk to Emily Clark a little bit about that. She said she's seen Emrance play, a skater positions, quote unquote, a few times. So she said, you never know. It's never too late to try something new. So we'll see if we get to see that.
Yeah, so how fast you can go when you don't have pads.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So if anything, I mean, probably very explosive without all that gear. So that was really exciting. Of course, there were also the other community events, the Learn to Skate events. There was also a street hockey event where now retired Soroya Tinker, who actually is taking on a DEI role with the PWHL. She was a part of that, but just overall really great. I also got to talk to Sarah Nurse and John Quell Jones on February 1st, first day of Black History Month, and both of them have island connections. So it was really hilarious talking to both of them. I mean, Sarah obviously is a hockey player. She's used to being cold, but John Quell Jones, not so much. But it was really great to hear them both talk about just being able to support other women's pro leagues. Also, Tessa Virtue, who is just a famed figure skater in Canada, was there, as well as one of the celebrity coaches. So I think from that point of view, it was a really great event. And I'm looking forward to seeing if and how the PWHL specifically is involved in more activities at NHL tentpole events.
Yeah, and John Quell Jones, of course, part of my New York Liberty in the WNBA. Have to throw that in there.
Oh, for sure. Well, I am a tried and true New Yorker. So yeah, that I had to get that in there. She also confirmed to me during NHL All Star, which I thought was hilarious, that indeed she is returning to the New York Liberty. So we got that scoop over on the Locked On NHL podcast.
Love that. Yeah, I think, for me, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more participation in the skills competition from the PWHL players. I think that was missing a little bit. I know they had some passing, like to set up one-timers and stuff like that, but I feel like they could have integrated that a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because first of all, I mean, I was at Skills an all-star last year and this year. And I just get a little dizzy. I feel like if the events themselves aren't changing, then the names are changing, the concepts are changing. And I guess to some extent I get it, but also like, what are we doing, fam? And to that end, I mean, one of the greatest moments, obviously I'm biased, I always bring a women's hockey slant to everything, but one of the greatest moments that came from Florida was Sarah Nurse putting on the Forsberg in the skills, in skills, or I guess maybe it was 3-on-3. Again, it was very confusing. Even the athletes in Florida, they were like, I don't know, we just started doing things and hope for the best. So I'm with you there. I think there's a lot of potential. I even spoke to some athletes. I spoke to Oliver Bjorkstrand, obviously, because I'm the host of Locked on Kraken, but also spoke to Robert Thomas from the St. Louis Blues. And, they all are kind of keeping up. And Thomas, especially, I believe he said he's a Toronto native. So he's been keeping up with what's been happening in women's hockey in the area, and was super excited to involve the women hockey players. So I think it'll be sooner rather than later. And I hope that the PWHL is able to find their own version of an all-star weekend. So even if we don't get it at the NHL All-Star, we can find ways to get some more just celebrity action in women's hockey.
Now, some neutral site games coming up in the PWHL. Talk to me about that and what it means.
Yeah, Gil. So, I mean, I know I've talked before, especially shouting out UBS Arena, because the New York team plays some of their games, 4 of their 12 home games at UBS Arena, which of course is also the home of the Islanders. And actually at All-Star, during the 3-on-3 showcase, the women's showcase, tickets opened up. They switched the February 16th game for PWHL Toronto versus, I believe it's Montreal. That was set to be at Mattamy, which is the old Maple Leaf Gardens, where the first ever NHL All Star Game ever held. I actually didn't know that history of that. It was kind of it was a benefit for an injured player. That was kind of cool. I learned that while I was in Toronto. Anyway, the PWHL moved their game from Mattamy to Scotiabank Arena, and they actually sold that game out. So I guess it's a neutral site because the PWHL Toronto team doesn't play there regularly, but it's definitely not a neutral city. But there is actually going to be a weekend of events where the PWHL is going to be at neutral site arenas, including Motor City. That's right. The Detroit Red Wings and Little Caesars Arena. And of course, PPG Paints Arena. Now, Detroit has hosted women's events before, I believe the Rivalry Series, and Pittsburgh has hosted multiple women's hockey events for the NWHL/PHF, for the PWHPA. There was that year that 4 nations got canceled. And so Team USA and Team Canada actually had a joint training camp and then exhibition in Pittsburgh. They were actually at the practice facility for all of the aforementioned events. There was even an NCAA event and tournament that Pittsburgh hosted. So not surprised by Pittsburgh at all. Really not surprised by Detroit at all. And I think you're starting to see that they're trying to congest the middle a little bit, because you've got Minnesota and then everybody else for the most part is on the East Coast. So I do think that these showcases are an opportunity to broaden the reach of the PWHL, maybe even testing out markets. But as far as I'm concerned, the Pittsburgh market really doesn't need to be tested at this point, Rachel.
No. Yeah, absolutely. You're right about all those events. I've gone to several of them in the Pittsburgh area, and it's always very successful. It's always well attended. And I absolutely would be shocked if Pittsburgh wasn't amongst the first expansion teams announced.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a good time. And I think also what we're seeing with some of the numbers, Gil, that we've seen in attendance, and that's why the move from Mattamy to Scotiabank Arena is so huge, is that actually the Toronto team is doing great at selling out, but their sellouts are at, I don't know, maybe 2,300, somewhere around there. I think it's a touch below 3K that they can actually fit safely in Mattamy. So when we see these is, whether it's a one-off like we see in Detroit and Pittsburgh, or even at Scotiabank Arena, I think it's just showing that, again, something that we've known and something that the preceding leagues have also shown us, that women's hockey was always ready to expand beyond 6 teams. I don't think the PWHL even needed to start with 6 teams, but my take on that is that a lot of people wanted to mirror, I suppose, the original 6. I could go without it here or there. I'll also, in full disclosure, I have a podcast called The Founding Four, which, again, maybe I'm not completely unbiased there. But
the original 6 is a made-up marketing construct. So
well, and there you go. But it's very familiar, right, to hockey fans. So I think that makes a lot of sense there. But I think it's going to be an exciting time for women's hockey, and that includes with the rivalry series coming up. We're starting to see players from the PWHL get their first licks with their national teams. Specifically, Rachel, I want to talk about Corinne Schroeder, who it was able to make the rivalry series roster for Team Canada. They actually just got the win in this next rivalry series kind of window over USA. I believe it was 4-2 the other night. But Corinne Schroeder, she didn't see action in net during that game. But I do hope that she gets a chance. But it is a big step that she is in net. She plays for PWHL New York. She got the first ever shutout in PWHL history. And, I'm also eager to see how this impacts the level of play and what we consider and who we consider when we're talking best on best. But Corinne and her team, Rachel, they're in a little bit of a bind here. They're not.
They are.
Yeah, they're not quite top 3. It's a 6, original 6. So there's 6 teams. They're in that 5th spot. Now, Toronto was able to leapfrog a little bit, got a big win at Mattamy right after NHL All Star Weekend. But Minnesota and Montreal are at the top of the table, 17 points and 15 points, respectively. Montreal ahead of Minnesota. Boston, Toronto, and New York congested with 11 points in the standings. And then Ottawa in that 10 spot. And a lot of that is just not being able to get wins in regulation, especially. And the way the PWHL point system works, it's a long points system. Being able to get those points even in overtime really makes a difference.
Yeah, man. What does Ottawa got to do to get an overtime win? It's like,
yeah, I don't know. It's tough. It's tough. I mean, I cover the Seattle Kraken, so not like I know what that feels like. But yeah, here's hoping. I think it's just, again, we said that it was a sprint to start the season, and effectively the first season itself is also a sprint. While you're learning, it's basically like every team is an expansion team. So the coaches, I still think it's a little odd, PWHL New York, that some of the coaches and GMs are openly saying, yeah, well, I never really watched any of my players before they were on the roster. So we'll see. And I'm like, these are like Olympians. Maybe you should, I don't know, watch a YouTube video. But so I think, anyway, all of that to say, there's still a lot of growing pains. And we've heard it from Ella Shelton. We've heard it from Savannah Harmon, who I mentioned got the hat trick in the NHL All Star Showcase. The team that's able to get their chemistry together quickly is certainly going to surge ahead at the top of the table early. Now, are those going to be the teams that are going to be in good position for the playoffs at the end of the season? Well, I guess we got to watch the games to find out.
Yeah, and should be interesting as this season progresses. Great to see this league coming together and growing right before our eyes. Erica, thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Feel better.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And anyone interested in some behind the scenes or some of the interviews from NHL All Star Weekend, make sure you're checking out the Locked On NHL shorts, because we'll have some bonus content for you there.